So, Brock, I have a question. As far as the youth ministry goes, after going off of what Corbin just read, and how the church participates. Me being somebody who has served and helped with youth ministry, you being a youth pastor, what is one thing that you think? I've noticed that. Let me say this. So I've noticed that when trying to get the youth to be plugged in and involved, they don't take that extra step initiative to make it. They just do it because they feel, either because somebody tells them to do it at home, or because they have friends that are doing it. I've noticed the difference between the youth group that I grew up in and the youth group that is here at Bethany is the fact that when the youth themselves plug in and actually exert energy into the youth group itself and not just let it be to whoever is leading them, the youth group runs 10 times better. Mm-hmm. From what I've experienced in the youth group, just the youth themselves have that community. I'm going to point to Harvest again. They have a huge youth group, and not on any night except for when we go to Bethlehem camp do I see these youth during worship raising their hands. Every single Wednesday night, these youth are in the worship.
At Harvest.
At Harvest. Yeah, these youth are in the worship. These youth are, not afraid of what their friend to the left or right of them is thinking about. So where do you think is something that, we as youth leaders and people who try to guide the youth, how is it that you think that we can get them on fire and ready to actually participate with their hearts and not just because their friends are doing it?
Well, that's a loaded question for sure. And the first thing I think of, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
And a lot of students, you can preach to them and try to hold their hand and lead them to where they need to be until you're blue in the face. And sometimes it's just the issue of the heart. They're just not at that point where they're just ready to fully commit to the Lord, or they're just not at that point where they're like, hey, I'm ready to just fully buy in, to what you're asking, and that's that. But I think first, these students, they need to see what they need to see by example. What it is you're asking them to do, and I think that's the first thing. If we're asking them to participate in worship, as adult leaders, are we participating in worship?
Right. That's a very good.
It's like if we're asking them to serve, are we serving selflessly?
Right.
If we're asking them to, abide in Christ daily, in prayer and in the Word, in confession, are we doing that ourselves? And then are we, we're not just telling them to do it, but are we teaching them how to do it? And that would be, first would be just setting that example.
Absolutely.
Would be, the first and primary thing is that, it's like if they don't see where they're going, how are they going to get there? If they don't know, that's where we're going, if there's not a clear picture, an image, or a goal, they're not really going to know where they're going. But if we can, explain to them, this is what worship looks like. This is what serving looks like. This is what, intimacy with Christ on a daily basis looks like. If we show that to them and they see, okay, I see where I need to go. And then we show them, okay, now here's how you get here.
Right.
Here are the steps to get to A, B, C, and D. We show them where they're going, and then we show them the steps to get there to the best of our ability. And it takes multiple adult leaders in a student ministry, being intentional about taking a certain group of students and holding them accountable. And
because you can't do it by yourself, especially with a youth group the
absolutely.
size that you got at Chipley. You can't do that by yourself. You've got to have a team of people that can help you.
So that's another thing is that you got to have the examples set before them. You've got to show them what it looks like and then how to get there. And then you've got to have adult leaders that are willing to walk with them, not just on Wednesday night, but throughout the week.
Absolutely.
Texting them, calling them.
Let's get coffee.
Y'all come to my house Saturday.
Yeah.
We'll do something, or they need that accountability.
They do,
from an
man.
adult leader.
100%.
And without that accountability, getting them fired up to worship, getting them in the Word every day, it's going to be difficult. But I will say this: the biggest problem in student ministry that I face or that I see is like the root of much of our problem in student ministry today. It's not the students, it's their parents.
Amen.
Yeah.
That's the old, because a lot of our students,
they're kids, man.
they're kids, and
they're a product of their environment.
Kids aren't going to come to church.
Not if their parents.
If they're not made to come to church.
That's
Right.
Kids aren't going to read their Bible naturally if they're not being held accountable.
100%.
Much of the problem is parents aren't doing what God's called them to do. They're not discipling their kids.
And it goes back to what we talked about, is God's called us, especially as men, to lead our families, and there's such a big lack of men leading their families. I can tell you so often, even here at Bethany, women are the spiritual leaders of their home because the man is not doing what God's called him to do. And that is not the right way. The woman should not have to carry that load as a spiritual leader of the family.
Yeah.
It should be the man. And you see that in student ministry, the effect of men not being who God's called them to be in their families, and it's affecting these students in such a bad way. So I just wanted to add that.
No, absolutely. And that was when you invited me a couple weeks to come preach at the Brotherhood, 2 Samuel chapter 10. That was one of the points that I really tried to emphasize, to the men of the church here, was like, God hasn't called your wife to be the one holding the sword fighting for your family.
It's us.
The men of God have been called to stand in the doorway and defend their family, physically and spiritually.
Right.
But that's a big misconception in the church, is that some people think that it's the student pastor's job to disciple their children.
It's not.
And that's wrong.
So
the biblical pattern
Only
is.
has, the student pastor only has them for
a couple hours a
week. Maybe
right.
3 hours a week.
Yeah.
And
the parents got them the rest of the week.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a misconception.
And where does the world have them? How long does the world
That's
have
right.
them?
Every 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
At least.
There's an idea where it's, and people think the student pastor, like we're paying you to disciple our children.
No.
That ain't how that game works.
No, we're a supplement ultimately.
Yeah.
The parents 100% need to be the major disciplers of their children.
Yeah, I should be re-emphasizing
that's
what
it.
parents
your support.
Yeah, are teaching at home and encouraging and maybe going a little deeper. But
and God and as pastors, God has called us. One of the distinct purposes of rightly dividing the word. Not everybody's called to be a pastor. And I remember talking to a guy. I was at Buff, Baptist University. And there was a guy, he was in the ministry degree program. He's not in it anymore. And it's because God, and I'm not getting into all that, but I remember him talking. He's like, yeah, I think I might be a pastor. That might be something I want to do. And I remember thinking to myself, buddy, don't do it if you ain't called first. If God ain't called you to do it, do not do it. I remember me and Brock jokingly say, there's probably not a week that goes by that you're like, man, I need to quit. This is tough, because it is, man. It's such a heavy weight that we're carrying. But going off to that with parents, God has given us a particular calling to shepherd God's people, and in the student ministry, you're called to shepherd those youth, those kids, but like you said, most importantly, those parents. And I remember when I was doing student ministry here at Bethany, if there was an event going on, I would send out a group message to all the youth, but I'm texting parents.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to happen if the parents aren't involved. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be there for those parents. And there's a majority of our students in our student ministry, the parents are not in church. And that's really a common issue in most youth groups, especially on Wednesday nights, because your youth group on Sunday is different than your youth group on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And I think you can attest to that as well. But your Wednesday night crowd is typically made up of a lot of kids whose parents aren't in church, and
they're being invited by friends.
They're being invited by friends. They're coming. And the issue that is parents aren't doing what God's called them to do. But there has to be a way that we've got to figure out better ways to bridge that gap and reach these parents, because that is ultimately the big thing. Because if parents aren't doing it and they're not getting anything at home, they're only getting a couple hours a week, they're going to get to college, and that dropout rate is going to keep getting higher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, I wanted to mention this. You know, you look at cults, for example. Going back to what you said, being willing to talk
Did
about
you just say cults?
cults. Yes,
Okay.
cults. You look at Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, all these crazy stringent groups. They do not want their people to look at anything outside of what they give them. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are particularly told not to look at things by other people talking about the church. You know what I mean? They're not allowed to get different perspectives. And that's what a cult does. They're trying to keep their people constrained to this ideology, but that's something that is pastors that we should not be afraid to talk about the hard things, to give different perspectives and opinions. And if you're part of Bethany and we have a Wednesday night class that I lead, and most of the people in there are young adults, and they know now that I am not afraid to talk about the other viewpoints and the other perspectives, because what happens with students when they're not given these other perspectives, they're not given these arguments, these apologetics, they're going to get to college and they're going to fall away. And we need to be unashamed to talk about these other things. And that's, I think, one of the big purposes of the bigger picture. That's why we want to have other perspectives on here. Yeah. Because Christianity is made up of more than just Baptist. You know, I think the sad thing is a lot of people get this idea that, hey, it's just me and my church, my local church. We forget there is a large group of people throughout the world that call themselves Christians, and they're part of different groups. And that's why even the bigger picture exists, is to find unity through our differences.